So another somewhat difficult section, we're going to go through section 3.5, which is going to teach us how to complete the square. So we have a few things to kind of get through first. We're going to look at some problems that are already set up so that we can solve a perfect square. But we're going to go through and complete one, which will help us find the vertex. It will help us find some of the other points. Well, we'll kind of get into that, whether the function is going up or down, any of those kinds of information. That's really what this vertex form is. So when we see it here, this, of course, is our multiplier. Is it going up faster or slower? Is it going down instead of going up? Here is our vertex in this particular case, and we can figure out how to be able to graph things from this form a little bit easier once we do that. But we're going to be going through completing the square to get to that point. So first thing is using this square root property. So what we have to do is go through the square roots. We did that last section, which was 3.3, and kind of got through some of these things. So notice that we have x squared minus 49, and we get x plus 7, x minus 7, and learning how to be able to go through some of these different types of examples. So you'll see how those problems kind of fall out once we get to that problem. And so first thing we're going to do is we're going to do this one, which is x squared plus 14x plus 49 equals 169. We're going to work on that problem at the beginning. So here we have it. And what we're going to do first is we're going to factor this here. So what we have to do is we have to realize that the first term, which is really 1, so we have in this particular case 1 times 1, and over here we have 7 times 7. So this could be a perfect square trinomial. What we have to do, of course, is again, we first look at A and C, make sure that those are perfect squares. If they are, then we check to see if we can multiply 1 times 7 and 1 times 7 and add those up. And so we get 14. So therefore it will factor, and it will factor down to x plus 7 and x plus 7. Now, how do I know that they're both positive? Well, remember that this here tells me that they're both the same sign. This one tells me that they're both positive. So keep that in mind. This is the one that's telling me that they are both positive. Okay. So the only way we can factor a perfect square trinomial is if this is positive, this is a perfect square, this has to be a perfect square, and then when I multiply 1 times 7 and 1 times 7 and add those up, we get 14. So now we have that. So now we have that equals 169. We can rewrite this as x plus 7 quantity squared equals 169. And that gets us to the next point. So then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take the square root. So to solve it, we're going to take the square root. And if you recall in the last section, when we did use the square root to solve a problem, we had to remember on the constant to put plus or minus in front of it. On the variable part, which is this part, we don't have to do that. And if you recall, taking the square root of a square just gives me x plus 7. So if I take the square root of 2 times 2, that is, or 2 squared, that is just 2, right? So we can just get that. So that equals plus or minus 100, the square root of 169. And now we can solve it. So we have x plus 7 equals, and the square root of 169 is 13. So we have plus or minus 13. Now, that's not quite the final answer. We have to actually solve for x. So we're going to subtract 7 from both sides. So when I do that, I get x equals, and we always put the number in front, but the plus or minus behind. So we have negative 7 plus or minus 13. And that gives us two answers. X equals negative 7 plus 13, and x equals negative 7 minus 13. So that gives us x equals 6, and x equals negative 20. Okay, and that's how we solve those types of problems. So now we're going to look at one where it doesn't come out so nicely, but we can see that that is 1 times 1 and 8 times 8. Of course, 8 times 1 plus 8 times 1 is 16, but notice this is a negative sign. So that is really x minus 8 times x minus 8, which of course is really x minus 8 quantity squared equals 175. My next step then is to go in and take the square root of both sides. So I take the square root of both of those. And when I take the square root, of course, it becomes x minus 8, which is this part, equals plus or minus, and with 175, that really is 25 times 7. You can see, of course, 25 is a perfect square. And so we really have x minus 8 equals plus or minus 5 square root of 7. And having that, I'm then going to add 8 to both sides. So notice I'm just going through the steps, not worrying about having square roots, fractions, any of that stuff. I don't really care. And now we have x equals 8 plus or minus, the plus or minus always goes next, 5 squared is 7. Of course, I cannot combine those together because multiplication always comes first, which is that part. And so I have two answers. X equals 8 plus 5 squared is 7. And, oops, not 8 equals. Should have been X equals. And X equals 5 minus, goodness gracious, 8 minus 5 squared is 7. So we have two answers here, 8 plus and 8 minus. And now we'll move on to the next example.